All right, guys. Well, we're 11:01 here, Central Time here in Chicago, where I currently reside. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar on contemporary oak decline and management, problem, solution, and prognosis. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know, if you weren't already aware, that we recently changed our name from Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements to Rainbow Ecoscience as of November 1st, 2021. Our new name reflects the company's purpose that started in arboriculture and now includes products and protocols that encompasses the tire and green industry. This includes landscape as well. We are employee owned moving forward, and so we weren't bought out or anything like that. Same great folks with a new broader overview moving forward. Something that's really important with Rainbow Ecoscience and our collaborators is safety. So before we begin today, I want to start off with a safety brief, one of our core values here at Rainbow Ecoscience. Like I said, before we begin, just check your surroundings for any trip hazards, cords, or bags. If attendees are attendees are all over the country, and so please be aware of any inclement weather in your area or other issues that may arise. If you're traveling in a vehicle and you have this on video, just make sure that you're in a safe location so that accidents can't happen. Or if you're driving, just make sure you have your volume on or hands-free so that you're not distracted from driving safely. A little bit about myself. I'll be kind of moderating this presentation this morning. My name is Cory McCurry. I'm an arborologist, maybe a Midwest arborologist. And so what that means is I do a lot of tech support, training, education, plant health care protocols. And then a little bit about my background is I've been in the industry for about 8 years. I have a degree in biology from a Division II university in Kansas called Fort Hays State University. And my minor is in chemistry. So if you have questions, there's my contact information, post follow-up. Please don't hesitate to reach out. If you have questions as we go along here, just make sure that you're typing those into the Q&A box down at the bottom there. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation, and this webinar is recorded, and a link will be sent out after the webinar if you'd like to share with anyone that may be interested. The webinar is worth one ISA CEU. And if you have not done so already, just please go ahead and put in your ISA certification number in during registration. Please type that into the Q&A so that we can get that down and you'll get awarded that credit once we get kicked off here. Without further ado, I just want to introduce today's speaker. It's going to be Dr. Chad Rigsby, a great friend of mine, a phenomenal researcher. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about Chad. He's a current research scientist and technical support specialist with Bartlett Tree Research Laboratories, the Morton Arboretum. Chad graduated from Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio in 2011 with a bachelor in biology. He then received his Ph.D. in environmental science from Wright State University in 2016 and spent 2 years as a postdoctorate research scientist at the University of Rhode Island. Chad was hired by the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratories as a research scientist and technical support specialist in 2018, based at the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois, outside of Chicago. Chad's research focuses on a variety of topics centered on trees, including pruning and biometrics, soil and root management, pest management, tree stress, growth defense trade-offs, and tree planting practices, and spans all levels of biological organization from molecular and biochemical to the ecological. As a technical support specialist, Chad works with Bartlett tree experts, arborists, and other groups to educate on and implement best management practices and science-driven tree care. So without further ado, I please welcome Chad Rigsby. Chad, if you want to go ahead and take the screen, it's all yours.
Thanks, Cory. That is an absolutely agonizing bio. I am going to have to do something about that. Cory, if you stop sharing, I can pull my, thank you. There we go. Yeah, that's a pretty agonizing bio. I'm gonna have to do something about that. That's hard to sit through. I'm not that interesting of a person. I also learned that, Cory, I knew there was a reason I liked you. You have a minor in chemistry. I also have to apologize. I goofed up the title. Titles don't matter. We're talking about oaks today, everybody. So sit back and get ready for that. I will say before I get started here, though, that Rainbow's a great partner with Bartlett, our research laboratory, and us as a company. A lot of shared values in scientific, science-driven tree care and ethical practices and emphasis on safety and other things. So we very much enjoy our research and work together. So Rainbow's a great company, and we're a fan. Okay, enough of that. We're going to talk about oaks today. And one thing that somebody said to me when at our research lab, when I mentioned I was going to talk about oaks for you guys today, was, hey, you should start with why oaks are important. And I had that sort of realization that, you know, oaks we kind of tend to take for granted, I guess. They're tremendously important, but it doesn't really like sink into your mind how important they are. From a natural systems perspective, sort of forests and other natural systems, really, regardless of where we are in certainly in North America, but I think in large chunks of the world as well, oaks tend to be keystone species. Keystone species meaning that the entire environment as a system, the ecosystem, depends on these species. And what I mean by that is, you know, they produce food for a variety of wildlife. The resources, habitat, and if oaks were to ever disappear, the system, the natural system as we know it, would collapse essentially and be something altogether very different. So they're incredibly important keystone species. They also tend to be a climax species as well. And what I mean by that is it's kind of the end point when we're talking about succession. So if you have a disturbance like fire or something like that, the first thing you tend to see back are things like mulberry and maple and birch and ash and things like that. And over time, gradually, we sort of end in a lot of environments with oaks as being the dominant tree in that system. So incredibly important from that perspective. Also, they tend to be very long-lived, and as we're finding out now from a lot of the climate change, climate-driven research and linking forests and climate, it's really the longer-lived, large-diameter trees that do the majority of the heavy lifting in terms of carbon sequestration in these systems. The smaller diameter, you know, few inch diameter, even 10, 15-inch diameter trees, they do not carry the amount of carbon that these large trees do. So it's really the larger trees in the forest that are storing the majority of carbon, and oaks are a long-lived species. So important from that perspective. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of one of the angel oaks down in South Carolina that we've worked on to do cabling, bracing, stuff like that. So if you've ever had the opportunity to check out these trees, they're great, really fantastic specimens. This is actually the 9/11 Memorial Site in New York, which Bartlett we take care of. There are, I forget exactly how many, but there are hundreds, I want to say 400, 500, 600 swamp white oaks on site. And this is a pretty moving place to be and spend time in and reflect. And these swamp white oaks certainly play a role in that. But that's a great site. If you're ever in the area in New York, get to check it out. Obviously, in urban systems, they're valued species as well. Fall color, shade, they're long-lived, all of these different attributes. One thing that I think is underappreciated when it comes to oaks is their structure. They tend to have really good structure, opposite branching and all that. They are not going to absolutely fall apart like a mulberry or a willow or something like that. That you can usually find a species for your site condition, shade, light level, moisture level, soil conditions. There's usually an oak for that sort of situation. Especially here in the Midwest, Cory and I know that these oaks tend to be specimen trees on properties. You think of these big, beautiful, sprawling bur oaks in northern Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, places like that. They're just fantastic specimen trees. Adding to property value, ecological services. So these are really important trees in both natural and urban systems. Now we get into the bad stuff, though. I did a Google search for using the phrase oak decline, and I got almost 30 million. Took Google a half a second to spit back at me 30 million hits using that term, and I just had to click on it. One of the links that popped up right away was a Bartlett link. I had to click on that and see what was up there. But this is a thing, certainly, that folks all over North America certainly are concerned about. And then what I did was I left in oak decline, and then I just slapped in some states just to see how many hits came back. So I would put in oak decline California, oak decline Illinois. And California gave me over 8 million hits, Illinois over 6 million, Texas almost 7, Georgia a little over 6 million. New Jersey, I was surprised, gave me back almost 12 million hits from that search, which that was a head scratcher. I did not expect that. But I'll give you just a second to guess which state, and I didn't do all 50, of course, but which state spit back the most hits. Was actually Massachusetts, of all places. I did not expect that. Almost 23 million results from that search. So there is something going on in Massachusetts for sure. This is telling us that certainly in North America, on the continental scale, oaks there's things going on with oaks. This is kind of a pause and reflection point. We got to think about this. This is a bit of an issue. And there are certainly sort of regional specific issues, pests, diseases, things like, and we're going to get into some of the major ones. I'm not going to go into detail on any one specific issue. I'm going to try and spread the love around and talk about different parts of North America. But when you're talking about continental scale, we're talking about something more, right, than just a single pest or a single issue. And what is the one thing that is consistent on that level of geographic spatial scale, on the continental scale? Climate change, obviously. Now I hope we're past the point of talking about if this is a real thing or not. We see very tight relationships between carbon in its various chemical forms in the atmosphere. Here I'm giving you carbon dioxide and global surface temperature. And so this is a very tight relationship. There's more carbon, there's higher temperatures. Evidence that we've seen over the past several years, certainly, this is the growing season warming since 1970 for the states. And you can see that almost throughout the United States, we have experienced some level of increase in the growing season temperature, the average growing season temperature. So that's April through October. Some spots more than other. New Jersey's getting slammed. The Southwest is getting slammed. But temperatures are increasing for sure. 2021, we set some records, especially in the Pacific Northwest. You guys had that heat dome out there that just sat on you and baked you for, I don't know, what was that, 3 or 4 days? Just agonizing stuff. And throughout a lot of the northern parts of the country, saw top 10 hottest summers or records set in the summer. So we're seeing this. And this was a fun little graphic I found that from the University of Maryland that is trying to illustrate under different emission scenarios what your city might feel like in the future. And Chicago here, the Chicago area where I currently live, and then this triangle right here is Dayton, Ohio, which is the area that I'm from. So I escaped Dayton just in, I don't know, 50 years to end up back in Dayton as far as climate goes. So that's with mitigated emissions. That's not business as usual. Anyways, that's just a fun graphic, I think. But it's not global warming. That was sort of the buzzword for a while. But we talk about this in terms of climate change. And climate is more than just temperature. And I want to talk about precipitation. This is where it just adds a lot of issues to the mix. This is illustrating that we're getting wetter, especially along the eastern half of the United States. Some states like Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, states in the Northeast are experiencing substantially more rainfall annually than they historically used to. And it's not just amount of rainfall, it is not just volume of water, but volume of water in single events. So these are heavy precipitation events, increases in heavy precipitation events or the percent increase from 1958 to 2016. And pockets of the Midwest and Northeast are getting into the 40–50% range as far as percent increases, and it varies from there. But we're getting more water, and we're getting more water all at once. Saturated soils, trees sitting in waterlogged soils. You guys kind of see the issues associated with that, especially with a lot of oak species. And again, 2021's wettest day. We're setting records, wettest, some spots in the Midwest, Northeast. I remember California, I think it was last year, the Bay Area just got dumped on for a few days or a day or something. So we're setting records for sure. And I wanted to point out that it's also adding another layer of complexity to this. It's not just temperatures, and it's not just amount of rainfall that we get, or even amount of rainfall during a single event that we're seeing. We're seeing variation that is very disruptive. So this is 2018, 19, and 2020. The Chicago, Northeast Illinois area set 3 consecutive May the month of May, set 3 consecutive records for wettest May, above 8 inches of precipitation. So it was one right after another. 18 was record setting, 19 was the new record, 2020 was the new record. And then all of a sudden last spring, last May, somebody turned off the tap. And this in itself is a problem. The wild swings that our trees are experiencing is quite problematic. So it's all different layers of complexity. We're going to kind of break things out a little bit into different regions. And I'm sorry, Mountain West, Great Plains area, I don't have personal experience with this area. I'm sure there is a lot of similarities, lots of issues that we share. But these areas that I've kind of highlighted, New England, Mid-Atlantic, Texas, Midwest, especially the Midwest, Pacific Coast, are areas that I am most familiar with and that I will kind of hone in on for this as far as pest and disease issues. But just keeping in mind, climate is what binds us all for all of these oak issues. So kind of getting back to a summary about this, we're seeing major changes, and whether that's a lot more or a lot less precipitation, and generally hotter, drier, more stressful growing seasons, also a longer growing season. These trees are having to put up for not just stressful conditions, but stressful conditions for a longer period of time. And that in itself is a stress. And like I said, it's this variability, using the Chicago May precipitation example, it's this variability that just kills us. You can see going back into the 90s and 2000s, we would get maybe a year of heavy precipitation, and then we would kind of fall back down around this average point. You know, we'd maybe sprinkle in a little bit of a drought or something like that, but we would always come back to something that approached average after a single wet season. This sort of string of years in a row of precipitation is just, and then followed by that dry May, is just what killed us. So it's that variability, that disruption of the cycle is really impactful. Okay, so like I said, kind of breaking things up here, regional pest and disease issues. We're not going to get into any of this in detail, but I need to mention something. Spoke with colleagues of mine in each of these areas, and they kind of gave me the top list of things that are problematic in their area. So armillaria, bacterial leaf scorch, Phytophthora, and I put a 2 or a 1 next to it based on whether you can kind of consider it a primary pest or a secondary pest. Secondary meaning that it's usually destructive if the tree is stressed out, and then it kind of attracts that pest or allows that pest or disease to kind of take over and really cause damage. Oak wilt, I have an XO for an exotic. We believe oak wilt, things are now are kind of pointing to oak wilt as being an exotic pest, but that's not totally conclusive. And then spongy moth, it's going to take me a while, but spongy moth is the new common name for Lymantria dispar, formerly known as gypsy moth. So there are some trends here that you can see. Pacific Coast, obviously, it's a little bit different, but we've got oak wilt, armillaria, cankers, beetles and wood borers are probably one of the things that unites all of these areas. And we'll just go through them here. So armillaria, not much to say about this, other than it's a native decay fungi, and it's a secondary invader, tends to be a secondary invader of stress trees. Well, if it's a secondary invader of stress trees, that means the trees are stressed. And it means that if we're managing these trees, we need to do more to alleviate that stress, whether that's taking care of soil compaction or addressing nutrient deficiencies or whatever. AKA honey fungus, shoestring fungus. You can also see, I don't have a good picture here, but you can see mycelial fans under the bark. But usually the shoestring fungus and this honey fungus is a good diagnostic to be able to tell what you're looking at here. Once it's got it, it's got it. There's not much to be done other than to try and address the stresses, get that tree nursed back to health and tip-top fighting shape so that it can hopefully fight off the fungus, or compartmentalize the fungus, seal it off, and not letting it spread. But I certainly do, depending on how bad it looks, you might want to do some sort of formal risk assessment or evaluation of the structure of the tree, for sure. Bacterial leaf scorch, for those of you not familiar, this is a bacterium called Xylella fastidiosa. It is transmitted by insects, specifically piercing sucking insects like leaf hoppers, sharpshooters, aphids, anything that has a stylet, kind of a needle-like piercing sucking mouth part. This bacterium gets into the xylem and plugs up the xylem so that water movement is restricted. Water can't move up from the soil into the, from the soil and roots and up the trunk into the branches where it needs to be. And so you see this, this gradual dieback and this scorching along the margins that'll kind of slowly work its way back towards the petiole. And the symptoms and ultimate mortality of the host ultimately will depend on the species. Some species are more sensitive than others. Here's the list from the American Phytopathological Society. I did not give them credit for this, that's my mistake, but that's where these host lists are pulled from. And knowing that there are plants out in the environment that can be reservoir hosts for this bacterium. They can go hang out on these other plants, not really do too much in the way of symptoms or damage or anything like that. They can be picked up by a leaf hopper or something and transmitted back to something that is impacted in a negative way. Check out all the oaks on this list: willow, white, water, turkey, swamp white, red oak, shumard, shingle, scarlet post. They're all on, all the major ones are on here, right? So our oaks tend to be very impacted by this. I've personally noticed, I'll get to that in the next slide. Again, this is the cycle of bacterial leaf scorch. It's usually picked up by some sort of piercing sucking pest like a leaf hopper, plant hopper, sharpshooter, something like that. They bounce over here to a healthy tree and feed on the healthy tree by injecting or piercing the vascular tissue with their stylet, sucking out all the good yummy juices in there, transferring that that bacterium over there, and then you get an infected tree, and then the margin, the scorching, and then it just sort of transfers. It's just like a mosquito or something, or a tick transferring tick-borne diseases or something like that. Just the tree version though. So this is something I've noticed here in the Midwest. I don't see personally a ton of bacterial leaf scorch. This, in my opinion, tends to be a really way more of a thing on the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, New England area. So everybody, but regardless of everybody everywhere, ruling out physiological or environmental leaf scorch first is going to be really important. So for bacterial leaf scorch, you're going to see scorching that progresses just here and there throughout the canopy in little spots, right? When you have environmental leaf scorch, say a tree in a small planter or in a parking lot or something like that, or something with a girdling root that is impacting vascular tissue right under the, right there at the root collar under the surface, you tend to get bigger chunks of the canopy that are impacted, either the whole canopy, or in the case of a girdling root, maybe one whole big leader of the tree will be scorched. So the pattern of scorching is going to be important for at least doing like a field diagnosis of this. There's a halo, which I didn't have a great picture of, but the bacterial leaf scorch usually causes a colored yellow or red halo right there at the margin of the leaf, where environmental scorch does not. And then for bacterial leaf scorch, the symptoms reoccur and worsen each year, even if you have normal or adequate soil moisture, adequate rainfall. For environmental scorch, you probably won't have that unless you have something like a girdling root or something like that. This image here is actually environmental or physiological leaf scorch rather than bacterial leaf scorch. Managing the vectors for this, really not guaranteed to do much in the way, because you can't get all of these little critters on these trees. It would be very, very, very difficult or impossible to do that. Systemic or foliar collide products obviously will manage aphids, leafhoppers, sharpshooters, things like that on these plants. And if maybe pressure is high in the area, or you've got trees that are adjacent to each other, one has bacterial leaf scorch and one doesn't, maybe this is a good idea to try to prevent that transmission. But once a tree has bacterial leaf scorch, it kind of has it. And there's really not much in the way of things to do except to just manage it and not let that disease progress any further. So the injection of antibiotics will keep that infection from spreading. Unfortunately, that is an annual injection that needs to be done. So we need to, drill holes into trees and injure them that way annually instead of maybe every other year to reduce that little bit of damage that we do by injecting. It does need to be done every year. But proper cultural practices like proper irrigation, mulching to keep moisture in the soil, all good things to do. Pruning has not really been shown to be effective at pruning out a diseased stem or something like that. Has not been shown to do much in the way of preventing the rest of the plant from succumbing to bacterial leaf scorch. Once it's in there, it's in there. Ultimately, if a removal needs to be discussed, then a removal needs to be discussed. And that's kind of what needs to happen. Moving on to Baroque Blight. This is kind of a Midwestern thing at this point. White oak, bur oaks are in the white oak group. White oaks can get Baroque Blight, but it's less common. It is mostly destructive and an issue on bur oaks. This is a fungus called Tabacia iowensis. It is a native fungi that really the emergence and proliferation of this fungus was tied to increases in precipitation that had occurred over the last 20 to 30 years in the Midwest. So there's sort of a direct impact of climate change that is bringing us more rain from the sky there. So late summer, you'll see these large brown wedges or blotches on the leaves. These lesions coalesce into large dead sections of leaves, and these leaves will have a wilted appearance. These spring infections lead to leaves that tend to stay on the trees through the winter, and twig and branch dieback will eventually occur over the course of a few years if nothing is done to intervene. It can kill a tree over so many years, but it's usually not what kills the tree. It's usually that it weakens the tree to a point where something else takes the tree out, like a root rot or wood borers or something like that. Small acorn variety appears to be more susceptible than the larger acorn variety, and older trees, these big, beautiful specimen bur oaks out on these properties seem to be most affected by this disease. Bur oak especially gets a lot of different Tabachia fungi here. Well, not in this picture, but there are 5 other Tabachia species that are known to cause leaf diseases on bur oaks specifically. So this makes identification really and the diagnosis of this issue pretty important. Tabachia ioensis, the disease-causing agent of Baroque blight, is really the one Tabachia that causes these lesions on the petiole. And you kind of see these spore-like structures here. These other Tabachia, however you pronounce this, Dryana. None of these other Tabachia, these 5 other Tabachia, produce these lesions on the petiole. So it's a really good diagnostic tool out in the field if you think you're dealing with Baroque blight in the Midwest. In the spring, when it's cool and wet, just like fungi like it, these fruiting bodies will swell. The fruiting bodies that are on the petiole, they'll swell and they'll burst and release spores with these April, May, June rains. And that rain splash will transfer the spores over to the young expanding leaves. And what makes these spring infections very problematic is on the petiole there, where they create that lesion, they'll actually kill that abscission layer. And so now the tree can't drop that leaf off so that the fungus floats safely to the ground and spores won't be all up in the canopy. It'll be safely on the ground. It's a strategy for trees to sort of cut ties with that leaf if it's toast, right? And that's what makes it problematic, right? So there are summer cycles of this disease, wet periods in the summer, June, even July. If there's a wet period, you can get cycling of this disease, but these summer infections don't kill that abscission layer, so the tree can senesce that leaf and toss it to the ground so that those spores aren't circulating up in the canopy. So these summer infections are not going to contribute to the annual cycle of Baroque blight building in the canopy. So it's really these spring infections that we need to worry about. And I need to pick up the pace here. This is a trial that we did working with Rainbow to work on some treatments here. And we found that injections of propiconazole are quite effective at reducing the disease severity of Baroque blight. This is just a couple different mixed rates that we injected on these oaks. The caveat being that this can cause phytotoxicity to a bur oak, but I would argue, and this is the way I would talk to a client about it, is this is the best thing that we can do for this oak, is to do this injection and treat for this disease, because once, if I go back a slide, once we bring that disease severity down, it stays down. And I've gone back to look at these trees for 4 years in a row, and Baroque blight has not come back on these propiconazole injected trees. So it's quite effective at knocking the disease down. And then the disease takes a long time to kind of build back up, and we'll reassess it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years or more down the road to see if we need to do another injection. So this one instance of risk of phytotoxicity, totally worth it. In a lot of these cases, we're not blowing leaves off the entire canopy, where we have so little bit of phyto in maybe 10, 15, 20% of the canopy. It's more so with these with a higher rate of propiconazole, less phyto symptoms with a lower rate of propiconazole. But ultimately, this is the best thing for this tree, for this disease. So it's not a death sentence. There are more serious problems out there that we'll get to. Inject propiconazole while needed, all while maintaining good cultural practices: mulch, irrigation, soil amendments, fertilizer, decompaction, all of that. We're avoiding the decline spiral. Epoxylin canker, opportunistic fungal infection, opportunistic canker here, usually a result of abiotic stress or physical injury. You can see these gray sections here, and this gray section that's riddled with bark bore or wood bore exit holes. Really, this is another one that they deal with a lot on the East Coast that is just a stress thing. We've got to manage the stress that these oaks are under. We've got to do everything that I was talking about in this previous slide: mulch, irrigation, soil amendments, fertilizer, all that stuff. We've got to check those boxes so that they're not susceptible to these, because these trees can usually fight off these infections from these secondary pests if we maintain vigor and health. Oak wilt, what I tell folks who might have oak wilt that just sprung up in their area, think Dutch elm disease, but for oaks. Maybe a bad way to think about it, maybe not, I don't know. Pathologists might grumble with me. Here's the current, well, as of 2016, I suppose, this was the latest map that I could find just with a quick Google search. This is a sort of another Midwestern into Appalachia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Texas sort of disease. And this is vectored by root grafts locally at a site. So from very local tree to tree sort of transfer, or it's vectored by nididulid beetles. That these nididulid beetles are responsible for the overland spread. So if an oak wilt center just sort of pops up out of nowhere, it's usually because of a transfer from a nididulid beetle. So a lot of folks who deal with this already are kind of aware of pruning windows, when we want to be pruning these trees, when we want to be avoiding that sort of thing. When you get down south, you're looking at avoiding pruning kind of from February to September, with the bulk of the nididulids flying and infecting occurring in March, April. More northern in sort of Illinois, Wisconsin, up into Minnesota, we're looking at an infection window that's April through September, with the bulk of those infections happening in May, June. So in the Midwest, this is sort of my quick little phenology calendar that I put together. The earliest recorded flight period for these nididulid beetles are about 50 growing degree days. 25% of the beetles have emerged at 130-ish growing degree days. And I think the stop pruning growing degree day is right around 200. That's where I feel enough of them have emerged to where it's time to close up shop. If you're pruning sort of in this early season window here, we want to be finishing up all of our pruning jobs during that time. Maybe think about painting the wounds with an asphalt-based tree paint. After 200 growing degree days, we need to be stopped, or we need to stop with the oak pruning. And this 200 growing degree days coincides with red bud. So if you're looking for plant phenological indicator for your area, at least for the Midwest, you notice red bud, eastern red bud first bloom. That's about when you want to absolutely hard stop for the oak pruning. Again, with the primary infection window happening in May, June. Stand level spread, again, through root grafts. So there's a whole system of trenching and things that we want to be doing to prevent the root graft transmission of this disease. And this is really kind of a death sentence for those oaks in the red oak group. The white oaks are a bit different. They can fight and they can be treated therapeutically, but the red oaks really need to be, prevention is what we need to be focused on with red oaks, because once a red oak has, any oak in the red oak group, once it has oak wilt, it's kind of a problem, and it's not much to be done at that point. Again, there's a whole recommendation out there in the extension literature for trenching, distance of trenching, and maybe we want to have some sacrificial oaks that we enclose in a trench line that we also protect with some fungicide, different rates. So if oak wilt's a problem in your area, definitely look into that local extension literature for those recommendations. These fungicide injections are pretty straightforward. Just propiconazole products will be very good at preventing, and this specific fungus is very, very sensitive to propiconazole as a active ingredient. So a little bit of propiconazole will absolutely kill this fungus dead. But therapeutic injections for the white oaks and preventative injection for the white oaks, red oaks can really only be treated preventatively. Sampling is important. If you have questions about sampling, get in touch with your local extension or whoever does your diagnostics for this. We've found this fungus to be very sensitive to temperature. So collecting branches with this vascular streaking, getting that in a plastic bag and on ice as soon as you can, overnight shipping on ice to the diagnostic facility is going to be critical. We also recommend to our arborists that they don't sample for this in really, really hot times of the year, like July, August. Just too hot for the fungus. Fungus will die and it will be dead on arrival to the diagnostic facility. You'll get a false negative. So this sampling, oak wilt sampling, is very, very sensitive to how you handle your samples. Phytophthora is an absolute plague for us in the Midwest. This is a native oomycete. It's not a fungus. It's another type of organism called an oomycete. It's in soils everywhere all the time, and it gets introduced, inoculum gets introduced to sites through nursery, through getting plants from nurseries. Major source of inoculum there. And new infection requires water. So plants, oaks sitting in waterlogged soils, that's just a nightmare for a lot of oak species. And with our clay soils in the Midwest that hold on to water, we really, really fight that. We're getting a lot more rain, a lot more heavy rain events, which means these trees are sitting in waterlogged soils for longer. It's a problem. So again, we need the 3 points of the disease triangle to line up here. We need the presence of the disease causing agent. We need a check. We need a susceptible host, an oak, check, and we need the environmental conditions. And we now have them, especially in the Midwest and the East Coast here. We have wetter growing seasons. So those conditions are all nicely aligned for the proliferation of Phytophthora. Wanted to highlight just a little list here of different plant species that can get Phytophthora diseases. The canker, the C, or the root rot is the R. So things like arborvitae are magnets for root rot. But you see oaks can get that bleeding canker on the trunk. Or the root rot. So oaks very, very, very susceptible to root rot. They're absolute magnets. And communicating with Gary Watson, who is now retired, here at the Morton Arboretum, from the Morton Arboretum, has spent the last couple summers going around and testing oaks from all over the Chicagoland area, dozens and dozens and dozens of oaks, all different species, all different conditions, sitting in water, sitting at the top of hills, in sand, in clay, healthy canopies, very bad looking canopies, and every single oak has tested positive for Phytothera. I myself, for the growing season of 2021, was 19 for 20 on positive Phytophthora samples, and the one that I got wrong was armillaria root rot. So Phytophthora is a huge problem when you have wet conditions and then you have fine textured soils like clay soils. It just amplifies that problem. And here I'm just saying climate change leads to wetter soils, leads to infection, leads to Phytophthora proliferation, and that cycle going and going and going ends up weakening and killing trees. Just getting at fine textured soils, hang on to water longer, and if you have these types of soils where you are, it just amplifies that problem, just like I said. There are treatment options. There are certain products that you can apply for trying to manage root rot, defense elicitors, infection preventers, things like that. Mulch is always a good idea, promotes the microbial community that will antagonize oomycetes and Phytophthora. Fixing drainage issues, that's where management starts for Phytophthora, is not having these trees sitting in wet soils for prolonged periods of time. Sudden oak death, showing some love for you West Coasters. This is I don't know, to a humble Midwesterner, this is a fancy Phytophthora, a bougie Phytophthora, if you will. But I kid, it's a problem. I totally understand that. There's a whole system of sanitation and quarantining plants, cultural practices for managing this disease, especially with installed plants and things like that. Look into your local extension literature for information there. Removing infected oaks and phosphites appear to be, or I know we as a company rely on the phosphites fairly successfully for this. The beetles and the wood borers, this is also extremely problematic. These guys swoop in when you have stress on these trees, which everybody has stress now. If you're on the Pacific coast, you have long periods of wet, or not wet, but hot, dry, stressed out plants. And here's some coast live oaks and some valley oaks in this parking lot here that are just annihilated with bark beetles here. Here's Western oak bark beetle and foamy canker, big problem out west. Also gold spotted oak borer, if you're getting kind of in the San Diego and further south, or San Diego, south of LA area. Two-line chestnut borer for those of us east of the Rockies. These stressed out oaks, again, I just keep coming back to this, are just magnets for this. So it's all about relieving that stress, addressing those cultural issues, irrigating, mulching, fertilizing, making sure that we have all our ducks in a row, T's crossed, I's dotted, sort of thing. And ending with spongy moth, again, formerly named gypsy moth, Lamantria dispar. It's a problem. It will defoliate and stress out oaks, mostly a problem in New England, but can be a problem in spots in the Midwest. I know here in the Chicago area, we've got a couple spots up into Wisconsin, across the lake in Michigan, we've got a few spots that are problematic. But this is another one of those pests that just cause a lot of stress and will just totally attract the secondary issues that are really, really problematic, like the bark beetles and wood borers and things like that. Plenty of management options, whether you're talking about a foliar spray or an injection or soil application of a systemic pesticide there. Take-home messages for all of this. These oaks need to be, especially the specimen oaks on your clients' properties, need to be actively managed. We can't sit back and let these things do their thing anymore. They need help. And that seems to be continent-wide. These things are stressed out by too much water, too little water, too hot, too dry, whatever. They are stressed. And so we need to be in there decompacting soils, fertilizing, making sure the irrigation is appropriate for the species, making soil amendments, adding compost, whatever we need to make there, and mulching to help retain that soil moisture. Actively managing these primary pests, these things that can cause stress and lead to other worse issues. We need to be in there actively, preventatively, in some cases, managing for these things. Prevention for some of these secondary things like oak wilt and Phytothera, removing dead material from the canopy, pruning out deadwooding, to use an old arboricultural term. Last thing I'm going to say, just a word on pruning, on my soapbox for a second. And this is mostly a pet peeve of mine. The pruning is absolutely part of a holistic plant healthcare program. Removing dead, dying, declining branches, you're deadwooding, you're pruning out cankers, you're removing dead material that could be attractive to wood borers, bark beetles, that sort of thing. All great. But we need to be making low aspect ratio cuts. That means we're making cuts that are small diameter, small cuts in size. And basically what I'm getting at is lion tailing is a plague. And that is, if you're not familiar with that term for whatever reason, it's basically going in here to the interior and stripping out the interior so that you just have long, naked branches and then some branching out here at the end. It's arboricultural malpractice to be lion's tailing. So the zone of pruning is this outer third of the canopy. This is where pruning happens, not in here, out here. But pruning should absolutely be part of a holistic plant healthcare program. No question about that. Okay, I had to zip through that. I miscalculated. I'm off my soapbox. Thanks. I'm going to turn it back over to Cory and stop sharing. Stop sharing. Here we go.
All right. Thanks, Chad. Incredible. Yeah, with that being said, I also want to mention, myself included, I also have been seeing a lot of oak decline as a generalist complex in the area. Chad and I, we work a lot on trying to figure this out. And when doing so, I just want to mention, I have a few products here that, Rainbow Ecoscience aligns upon, depending on what you're targeting. We have a holistic approach to try to manage a variety of cultural and pest and fungal issues. Cambisat being a growth regulator that's also got phenomenal secondary benefits that showcases how that can help increase the secondary plant response hormone, abscisic acid, for more chlorophyll. So that's maybe another option, an option you could utilize to try to help these historic oaks get over maybe the hump of decline, get them out of that spiral of doom, kind of that spiral once they go down. Zytec, Transtec, soil or trunk injections, metocloprid, dinotefuran for boring and pests such as sucking insects like the leaf hoppers that Chad was talking about earlier for bacterial leaf scorch. If you have chlorotic issues, a big one, there's a variety of things that we offer there. And then of course, air spading as a more cultural approach, just trying to change the soil environment if they're dealing with compaction, like a lot of our urban trees currently are. So we do have a broad variety of things at Rainbow Ecoscience to help you, kind of piggybacking on what Chad said. Just please feel free to reach out or ask us questions there. With that, we'll just go ahead and move on to the Q&A, Chad. And
hang on, Cory.
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's Allison. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge I put this in the chat. If you need to jump off, we are at the top of the hour. You will get ISA credit, so we will take care of that. The recording will be sent out so you can listen to the Q&A if you don't have time now. Thank you for being here. And then with that, Cory, do you want to moderate Q&A or do you want me to read the questions?
Allison, if you want to read the questions, I'm fine with
Cool.
that, since you've been helping answer them. So yeah.
Cool. All right. So yeah, thanks everyone. If you have to leave, we appreciate you. For those of you who can't stay, few questions coming through. Originally, they were saying that BLS affects primarily the red oak group. You mentioned white oak and swamp white oak also. Can you expand a bit on that?
Excuse me, goodness gracious. Yeah, I think BLS is certainly going to impact red oaks more, but the white oak group will get BLS. And once it's in there, I believe it's going to behave the same way as it would in a red oak. So this sort of slow, steady decline. I think we just tend to see it more, and it's more for whatever critters are on the red oaks. I don't know, tend to vector it more often, but we definitely see it on the red oaks for sure. But white oak, red oak, once it's in there, it's in there. And we can remove the tree or try to talk with the client about, what it's going to take to keep this tree going. It's going to be a commitment.
Cool. All right. Two sort of explanation things. Just explain really quickly phytotoxicity.
Oh, for something like a fungicide injection.
I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah. So there are some species and some treatments in some different situations where the tree is going to have what we call a phytotoxic reaction to the treatment. And I'm mostly associating this with things like propiconazole injections for Baroque Blight or oak wilt or something like that. Generally, what we see is maybe the blowing off of leaves of a branch or a certain part of the canopy where it'll just be leaf drop. Or it could be something as just some brown, discolored, dead, necrotic, almost dried out foliage on a few branches here and there. Very rarely, unless you're injecting large amounts, like the highest rate on the label for these propiconazole products, you are probably not going to completely blow the leaves off, the whole canopy of the oak. It's going to be in smaller sections. So it's just referring to a negative reaction, undesirable reaction, certainly, of the tree to the injection. The tree will bounce back. It hasn't lost that branch. It's not dead. It will refoliate, but just for a short period of time there, for maybe a chunk of that growing season, a month or two, it will look bad. It's just something the client is going to have to be prepped for. Hey, this could happen. It's not a death sentence. The tree will bounce back. This is the best thing for the tree. Yep.
Okay. And then what's the difference between oomycete and fungi?
Oomycetes, I'm trying to think of my tree of life. I think oomycetes are actually more closely related to animals than they are fungi. Fungi it's a whole different group of, bacteria, fungi, plants, animals. Oomycetes are their own thing, just like that. They are, common name is water molds, I believe, and they have different chemistry. Notably, their cell walls are made out of cellulose, whereas fungal cell walls are made out of chitin. And interestingly, cellulose is also obviously what wood is made out of. So that's why we recommend mulching trees, is because you mulch a tree, and the bacteria, the soil microbial community that is involved in breaking down that mulch, breaking down the cellulose in the mulch, turning it into compost, will also get the, just sort of as collateral damage, will also kill the oomycetes, or the Phytophthora, in the soil. So that's why mulching can actually be a management program for Phytophthora. But it's like a separate, it's like a plant, animal, fungi, oomycete. It's a big group of organisms.
Cool, thanks. All right, so I am just going to acknowledge one question. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. It says, it feels like we're missing some crucial aspects to oak health and care. And in fact, sometimes they're doing more harm than good. He or she is glad that their practice has evolved past where we are still at in this presentation. But it's interesting to see, to check in what we're doing. But what I wanted to note, Chad, you did an excellent job. Whoever this anonymous attendee is, if you could please send us your contact information. This is a big overview of things that are going on in the landscape. Chad's literally talking about stuff from coast to coast. So we have a lot more things in our toolbox and a lot more advancements out there. This is not really representative of every single solution to every single problem. So we would love to chat with you a little bit more. So please, anonymous attendee, we'd love to talk a little bit further. And we hope that you understand that we were confined to 60 minutes. All right. Okay, sorry. Can you explain oak wilt? Okay, people are wondering about oak wilt traveling from the Midwest towards the East Coast. So a couple people have said oak wilt may be out on Long Island near New York, and then other folks have been asking just about general travel of that pathogen.
I'm unfamiliar with how oak wilt is moving along the East Coast, other than to say it makes total sense if you have, just like something like emerald ash borer, you are transmitting infected or infested logs or wood or something like that to new areas.
Yeah, so it looks like on the map there was one little speck, so there must have been some detection of it on Long Island. So
okay.
To be clear, that's not Chad's data. That's data from a different source.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. It is traveling. Clearly, there has been a couple of notes that it has traveled. All right, just a couple more questions. Did you suggest asphalt-based paint for painting wounds, or what are you suggesting for that, or why are you suggesting that?
That is what we recommend to our arborists in Bartlett land. The reason for that specific recommendation is because that's what the entomologists and the pathologists tell me.
Cool.
Neither of which I claim to be.
Got it. All right. Yeah. So I know that there's some mixed ideas around this in the world. Different companies are making different recommendations, and I do not believe that the scientists are 100% aligned on this process. But I think Chad did mention what we are aligned upon, which is making sure you are only making those pruning wounds during that fully dormant season. Okay. And then injecting time for Baroque Blight. I don't know if you want to take that, Cory.
I can, yeah, absolutely. I would say anytime you get full leaf development, or starting earlier in the season, definitely better. So once you get full leaf development and you're going to have that translocating effect occurring due to transpiration, those leaves really actively breathing, that's when I would align upon doing macro injection with I'd say our product, selfishly Alamo propiconazole on that end. Expectations though vary, so this is a very difficult disease to manage. I would also align upon introducing maybe Cambisat or plant growth regulator at the same time you're treating, just to get other secondary controls. If you're fighting other secondary pests like borers, two-line chestnut borer, it may be also good to introduce a metaculprit or the dinotefran in as well.
Cool. All right, and then this one's for Chad. What is the effect of Lataporus sulfurious on bur oak? In Europe, it is recognized as a parasitic fungus of oak. Do you know anything about this? And if you don't, that's okay.
I have no idea what that is. Do you know,
Cool.
Allison?
I have no idea. Guy clearly is a
Yeah.
more more in
Guy,
tune
I'm
to this issue.
sorry.
It's okay,
Yeah.
Guy. If you want to send us an email, I think our information is right there on the screen. We can do a little bit of follow up and scour some resources for you. And then I think this is a good comment from Jeff, and I'll leave it on this, not to be depressing, but a bit depressing, getting to the point where planting recommendations is difficult because of emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, BLS, southern pine beetle, spotted lanternfly, etc. Which, yeah, I think that kind of goes to the a little bit morbid, but to the point that Chad made at the very beginning of this presentation. All right. Okay, Guy, we are unaware of this pathogen, but what we can do some research for you. But we appreciate you being on the cutting edge of things. Okay, great. Jennifer, just saw your question, please, or Steve, it's Steve. If you could just email us, that would be great. Thanks. All right. With that, we are way over time. Thank you, Chad and Cory, for your insights, and thank you everyone for your attentiveness. CEU code is in the box. We are doing it for you though, so you don't need to do anything as long as you got us CEU codes, or as long as your CE or your ISA code in there. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.